During World War II and the Korean War, prisoners of war faced a brutal truth. Survival depended far less on physical strength than on mental architecture. The body could be starved, beaten, deprived, and restrained. But the mind was the one asset the enemy could never fully control unless the prisoner allowed it. In that environment, Allied POWs developed a psychological system so effective that decades later variations of it were absorbed into SEER: survival, evasion, resistance, escape, training and eventually adapted by modern special operations units, including Delta Force. It wasn't an escape trick. It wasn't a method for resisting interrogation. It was a mindset, a mental operating system that allowed prisoners to maintain identity, structure and sanity in situations engineered to destroy all three. They called it the infinite loop. The infinite loop emerged from a pattern noticed by POWs who lasted longest under captivity. These men had a certain rhythm to their thoughts. They didn't let their minds sit idle or slip into dread. Instead, they created mental routines that looped endlessly, like a circuit that prevents a system from overheating. Guards tried to strip captives of time, control, and autonomy. The loop gave them all three back, internally. Psychologists studying post-war testimonies found that survivors often used repeating cycles that served three purposes. First, to preserve cognitive function through structured thought. Second, to regulate stress and fear by filling mental space. And third, to reinforce identity and purpose when everything else was stripped away. What made the infinite loop shocking was its simplicity. It wasn't a mantra. It wasn't meditation. It was continuous mental processing, deliberately designed so the enemy could not stop it. That's why special operations units still use a form of it today. It's resistant to sleep deprivation, isolation, sensory manipulation, and psychological stress, all tools employed during high-level SEER scenarios. The original wartime loops were different for everyone, but modern psychological reconstructions show they all shared four components. First, a repeating cognitive discipline. Prisoners of war created a never-ending internal activity, something to run in the background of their mind, always available, always occupiable. Examples included reciting multiplication tables forward and backward, replaying maps from memory, and rebuilding terrain, mentally constructing imaginary systems like train timetables, farm schedules, or engineering diagrams, and replaying full books or movies scene by scene. It didn't matter what the content was. What mattered was that the thinking never ended. It offered structure in an environment where captors removed all external structure. A personal identity anchor. This was really the psychological lifeline. The anchor was a repeated statement, a mental image, or even a personal mission that reaffirmed who the prisoner was outside captivity. Here are a few examples. I am an airman. My mission is not over. Or visualizing returning home and describing it in detail. Some would mentally repeat their full name, service branch, and their promise to survive. These identity anchors, well, they prevented the disintegration of self. Precisely what interrogators aim to cause. A micro-goal for every hour. The mind, you see, collapses under conditions where the future becomes ungraspable. Prisoners of war learned to shrink time. Instead of thinking about surviving weeks or months, they thought, well, make it to the next hour, or complete this mental task before the guard returns, and sometimes finish reconstructing this memory before sleep. Seer psychologists later found that, shortening one's psychological horizon is honestly one of the strongest survival strategies ever recorded. Number 4. A mental escape hatch. This wasn't just fantasy. It was, in fact, cognitive disengagement. Prisoners of war developed a specific mental place to retreat to when conditions became overwhelming. Some, built entire imaginary homes. Others reconstructed childhood environments. And some would walk familiar city streets, step by step, in their mind. This provided emotional insulation, really, without losing situational awareness. Modern special operations forces, face stress profiles that are quite similar to those endured by prisoners of war. We're talking about sleep deprivation, isolation, sensory overload, and, a profound loss of control during resistance training. Delta Force, SEAL Team 6, and other so-called Tier 1 units have adapted what's known as the infinite loop into a carefully calibrated mental model. These elite operators maintain cognitive load to prevent psychological collapse. They use internal structure to regulate fear and confusion, and importantly, they rely on identity anchors to stay aligned with both mission and values. They also, quite cleverly, shrink their goals to remain functional under extreme pressure. Now, the loop isn't taught as a single isolated technique. It actually emerges from multiple strands of resilience training. Operators learn to create their own cognitive cycles, develop identity statements, set micro-goals, and yes, establish mental safe zones. It's not fantasy, it's not escapism, it's what we call cognitive sovereignty. And in environments where the enemy controls everything except your mind, sovereignty is survival. Modern neuropsychology, really validates what wartime prisoners of war figured out almost instinctively. Structured mental activity, it reduces panic by occupying your working memory. And identity repetition actually protects against dissociation, which is honestly one of the most dangerous symptoms of captivity. Micro-goals, even the smallest ones, release dopamine, giving the brain a sense of motivation and direction, even in the most hopeless conditions. Mental retreat spaces, on the other hand, lower cortisol, which helps prevent psychological shutdown. The infinite loop worked, in fact, because it exploited how the human brain is wired for pattern, repetition, and meaning. Prisoners of war who survived the longest didn't really rely on luck or even toughness. They relied on a mental system that turned captivity into a clock they controlled. Their thoughts, not the guards, dictated their internal world. And special operators today use the very same principles because they tap into something universal and, indestructible. If you control your inner loop, no one can break you.